I've learned as a hospice chaplain. I haven't been a hospice chaplain for very long. Some of you have far more experience supporting people at the end of life. You've done this personally with your own dear ones. But here are 3 things I have learned that I feel sure about. 1, don't be afraid of grief. That's what our children's story is about. The empty chair. The heart bottled up because it hurts too much. The feeling of being so lost and not able to speak. One thing I learned about in my chaplaincy training is the concept of solitudinal grief. This, for me, was liberating. The idea that you can grieve without talking. The social worker, the therapist, the support group, even the chaplain, all ask the grieving person to talk. And that can be good. It can be powerful as well as necessary, but sometimes you just can't. It hurts too much, which is why I hate grief. But in solitude, I'm less afraid of it. The empty chair is a gaping hole. And yet, if we can manage to stay with it, just stay in the same room, it might feel less forbidding. It reminds us of the person we loved and the fact that they are gone. But it does not leave us comfortless. If we can bear to approach, it lets us rest. The pain and hurt are real, but the empty chair offers a place to grieve more softly. This is also why in church we light candles to mark our grief as well as our celebrations. We remember names that we didn't write in the chat box as well as those we do. We might remember them over and over, week after week. We can light candles in our homes too, and we might need to light a lot of them. So that's the first lesson. Don't be afraid of the grief. It is fearsome, but we can go through softly and sometimes quietly. Grief can come from just about any loss. I've grieved over moving house, changes at work. COVID-19 is a source of complicated grief, not only the lives lost, but also as we mourn our natural sociality, the times we are losing with people we care about. Every week, I talk to spouses and children of people who often, because of cognitive loss, are not able to use Zoom or even the telephone. Of course, we're anxious and scared and angry when we cannot offer the most basic connection, that familiar face or touch, because of COVID, when we would be there under any other circumstances. It hurts a lot. And the second lesson gets even harder. The second lesson is the lesson of lament. Because grief is not just personal. There's a deep, deep grief in our society over the original sin of the United States, the double knot of stolen land and stolen bodies. I fell into despair when George Floyd was killed. I was glad that people filled the streets, but I was in the streets after Michael Brown was killed 6 years ago. And what has changed? Why has so little changed? How is it that the same torture, the same disparities, the same endless conversations that analyze but do not prophesy keep happening over and over again? So I lament. How many names could I name before and after Michael Brown? Oscar Grant, Eric Garner, Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Rakia Boyd, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, and you know many more. Needless deaths. People denied their human right to live a natural lifespan, to come to the end peacefully, to receive the dignity and comfort of hospice care that I want everyone to have when their appointed time comes. Why should everyone not be able to die peacefully after complete and healthy, loving lives? The worth and dignity of every person that we revere in our church principles is so fragile. Look how people's worth and dignity is so easily, routinely stolen, robbed, destroyed while we stand by. It is right for us to protest, to lament, to wail and moan. It is right to call out, "Kumbaya." Someone needs you, Lord. Come by here. That's the second lesson. There are times when we must deeply, thoroughly lament, which includes not only sadness, but anger and rage and feeling powerless. And then third lesson, we must ground the energy, come back to earth. Sometimes I go down on my hands and knees. This is where we begin the hard task of facing reality, working with what we've got. This is the moment when we see our same old circumstances with new eyes and make shifts in what we can change, which is ourselves. If you are part of the Active Hope study group, you already know how honoring our grief and despair allows us to step out and choose to do something new. This is when we enter into brave space. So on the day the protests started, like I told you, I had no hope. But being a hospice chaplain, I have learned not to fight the despair. I looked around and all I could find was this houseplant. And according to Mike, this houseplant looks terrible, but it looked a lot worse on that day. Then it did not have all of these leaves. This part was just a stem, bare with just some green bumps. And when people hit the streets, and I felt so hopeless, one of those bumps was kind of big, like a pimple. And it grew so fast that just in a few hours, it was no longer a bump, but a shoot. It was at least a centimeter long. And that shoot turned into this big, huge leaf here that's bigger than my hand. I took a picture and I showed my social media friends. I don't have any hope, but I have a plant. I have a little bit of new growth. It didn't feel like much, and maybe it's still not much. The plant, after all, was just doing what it's naturally inclined to do. That was all I could muster. The plant has grown, and so have the protests. So that became my tiny shred of hope at that moment. But now, today, I have so much more. This sermon was going to end here, and I was going to tell you, do your grieving, do your lamentation, because then and only then you will find your shred of hope. It doesn't matter how tiny it is. That is the call. Let us grieve and lament and rediscover hope, no matter how small a thread. But then something else happened. I got an email from Reverend Kate, and she said, the church is dedicating new Black Lives Matter banners, and the dedication is going in your worship service. Sorry, but can you figure out how to put it in? And I was like, of course I can. This is the best possible ending to this worship service. It is so much more hope that we all need. Because these banners, these signs that you will soon see, are more than a thread. They are the fabric of hope that we have been weaving diligently for a long time. They show the world not only who we are, but who we want to become. We want to step out of our comfort zone toward beloved community. We want to build the dignity and worth of every person, and we know that means uplifting Black lives and brown lives and any lives being shortened and shrunk by the dominant world. By hanging these banners, posting these signs, we enter into brave space. We call each other into truth and love. We start where we are and we grow. So let us do that together right now with this dedication. And after that, we'll sing together hymn number 151, which is a song of hope and promise and yearning.